The correctional facility stood in silence at dawn, surrounded by thick walls and tall fences that seemed to keep not just people in, but hope out. The air smelled faintly of metal and rain, and the world beyond those gates felt like another planet. Inside, time moved slower. Every tick of the clock echoed like a heartbeat inside the cold halls. Officer Daniel had worked there for nearly a decade. He wasn't young anymore, but not old either, somewhere in between where life's weariness starts to show in the eyes. He had learned to stay calm in chaos, to keep emotion out of his job. He had seen people break down, beg, shout, and sometimes sit in silence waiting for an end they couldn't escape. That morning started like any other. The guardroom was filled with the usual chatter, coffee cups clinking, and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Daniel sat in his chair, reading over the duty schedule. When the warden walked in, the room quieted. The warden was a man of few words, his face lined with experience and burden. He handed Daniel a file and said, "You've got a new assignment. Special case." Daniel glanced at the folder. It was thin, marked with a red stripe and a small note on the cover. Final week. Inmate number 481. He didn't think much of it until he turned the page and saw her photo. A woman, mid-30s maybe, with calm eyes and an expression that didn't match the label beneath her picture. Death row. "She's scheduled for next week," the warden said. "You'll be responsible for supervision until the end. Keep her under observation. No exceptions." Daniel nodded silently. He was used to the job, but something about this case felt different. When he first entered the death row wing that afternoon, the atmosphere was heavy. The halls were quieter here, the air colder. He reached the cell marked 481 and stopped. Inside sat the woman from the photo. She wasn't pacing or crying like most he'd seen. She sat by the small metal table, sketching something on a torn piece of paper with a dull pencil. She looked up when she heard the door open. Her eyes met his, calm, steady, almost gentle. "You're the new officer," she said softly. Her voice carried a strange peace, like she had already made peace with the world. Daniel nodded. "That's right. I'll be here for the next few days." She smiled faintly and returned to her drawing. "All right then. Welcome to my little world." Her tone wasn't sarcastic. It was honest, as if she truly saw the small gray cell as her own corner of life. Daniel stood there for a moment before saying, "If you need anything, let me know." "Paper," she said without looking up. "And color pencils, if that's possible." "I used to paint," Daniel made a note. "I'll see what I can do." When he left the cell, something about her lingered in his thoughts. Most inmates he'd guarded tried to bargain or lash out, but she was different, quiet, respectful, even graceful. He wondered what she had done to end up here. That night, Daniel sat at his desk reading her file. The details were brief and impersonal. Convicted of murdering her husband 5 years ago. Found guilty by jury. Denied final appeal. No visitors listed. No family contact. Nothing personal, just cold facts. But one detail caught his eye. Evidence circumstantial. That word always bothered him. It meant they weren't sure, but it was enough. The next morning, Daniel returned to her cell. She was awake early, sitting by the barred window, watching the light creep across the floor. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," she replied softly. "Did you bring the paper?" He handed her a small notepad and a few colored pencils. She smiled, not like someone who got what they wanted, but like someone who received something priceless. "Thank you," she said quietly. As the days passed, Daniel found himself checking on her more often than his duties required. She never complained, never caused trouble. She just drew small things, sunsets, birds, faces, things that probably lived only in her memory now. One afternoon, Daniel asked, "Why do you draw?" She looked up from her sketch, thinking for a moment. "Because it's the only way I can feel free," she said. "When I draw, I forget where I am." Her answer stayed with him long after he left her cell. Later that week, he saw one of her drawings left on the desk. It was a simple picture of a lake at sunset, with a single figure sitting by the water's edge. It looked peaceful, too peaceful for a person awaiting death. He picked it up and said quietly, "You're talented." She smiled. "I used to teach children. Art therapy." "Before everything happened," Daniel hesitated. "Before what?" She looked at him carefully. "Before they said I killed my husband." Her tone wasn't defensive and it was tired, like she'd repeated the same truth for years and no one believed her. "Did you?" he asked gently. She looked down at her hands. "Would it matter if I said no?" He didn't answer. The silence between them said more than words could. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept seeing her eyes. Not the eyes of a killer, but of someone who'd lost everything and accepted it. He tried to push it from his mind, but it stayed there, heavy and unshakable. The next day, he arrived early. She was sitting quietly again, this time humming a soft tune. "What song is that?" he asked. "It's something my mother used to sing," she said. "About finding peace even when the world forgets you." Daniel leaned against the bars, unsure what to say. "You seem calm," he said finally. The morning light filtered through the narrow window of the corridor, creating long streaks across the concrete floor. The prison always felt the same, cold, controlled, predictable. But to Daniel, everything felt slightly different now. Since taking over the watch of inmate 481, there was something heavier inside him, something he couldn't shake off. When he walked past her cell, she was already awake. She had placed one of her drawings up on the wall, taped with the corner of an old envelope. It was of a tree, its branches spreading wide, full of color, though the leaves were drawn in shades of orange and red, like it was autumn. He stood there for a while, just looking. She noticed him and smiled faintly. "I thought maybe the wall needed something warm," she said. "It does," Daniel replied quietly. "Makes the place look alive." She turned back to her table where she was sketching another image. "Do you ever think walls can listen?" she asked. Daniel blinked. "Listen?" "Yes," she said softly. "To the people who live around them. The laughter, the crying, the secrets no one else hears." He looked at the dull gray surface between them. "If these walls could talk, they'd probably tell stories no one would believe." She nodded slowly. "That's the thing about truth. It's often unbelievable." Her words stuck in his mind. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he asked, "Can I ask you something?" She looked up from her sketch. "Go ahead. Why don't you ever talk about what happened?" "Most people do. They try to convince someone they're innocent or blame everyone else. But you don't. You just stay quiet." She sighed softly, resting her pencil on the table. "Because talking never helped me. I told the truth once and it didn't matter. People had already decided who I was." Her tone wasn't bitter, just tired. Daniel leaned against the bars, curious now. "Then what's your truth?" She looked at him carefully, studying his expression before answering. "My husband died. That part is true, but I didn't kill him." There it was, simple, calm, certain. No trembling voice, no desperate pleading. Just truth. Daniel didn't speak. He waited for her to continue, but she didn't. She picked up her pencil again, as if she had said enough. Later, during his break, Daniel found himself in the small staff kitchen, stirring his coffee absently. His colleague Reed sat nearby, flipping through a newspaper. "You look distracted," Reed said without looking up. Daniel shrugged. "Just tired," Reed smirked. "Or maybe you're getting too soft with that death row inmate you've been watching." "The quiet one," Daniel frowned. "I'm just doing my job." "Sure," Reed said, sipping his coffee. "But I've seen that look before. You start thinking they're different, that they're misunderstood. Then they turn around and prove you wrong." Daniel didn't argue, but Reed's words echoed uncomfortably in his mind. Still, something inside him resisted believing it. When Daniel went back to her cell later that day, she was humming softly again. This time he recognized the tune. It was the same one from before, slow and haunting. "That song again," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "It helps me think. I used to sing it to my husband. He liked the way it calmed me." Daniel hesitated. "Can I ask what happened to him?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He was a lawyer, ambitious, charming when he wanted to be. But behind closed doors he could be someone else entirely." Daniel felt a heaviness settle in the air. "One night," she continued slowly, "we argued. I told him I wanted to leave. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. He didn't take it well. The next morning he was dead. They said I poisoned him. I told them I didn't, but no one listened." She didn't cry. Her voice didn't waver. But the sadness in her eyes was deeper than words could describe. Daniel asked softly, "Did they find proof?" She shook her head. "Just a cup of tea. They said it contained traces of something. But I never made that tea. He wanted to ask more, but the intercom crackled to life. Officer Daniels, report to the main desk. I'll be back, he said, stepping away. She nodded, picking up her pencil again. I'll be here. That night after his shift, Daniel sat in his car for a long time, staring out at the rain streaking across the windshield. He kept hearing her words, I didn't do it. There was no way to know if it was true, but something in her tone told him she was sincere. He turned the engine on, then off again. He didn't want to go home yet. His small apartment felt emptier than usual lately. Maybe it was because for the first time in years he actually cared about someone's story. The next morning, Daniel brought her a small cup of coffee from the staff lounge. He wasn't supposed to, but he did anyway. She looked surprised. Is this for me? He nodded. Don't tell anyone, she smiled, holding the warm cup gently. You know, this is the first real coffee I've had in 5 years. He chuckled softly. Then I guess that makes it special. It does, she said, her eyes softening. Thank you. As she sipped, she said quietly, It's funny, isn't it? We measure kindness in small things. A smile, a cup of coffee, a few minutes of being treated like a person again. Daniel looked at her, realizing she was right. The job had made him forget that behind every uniform, every cell door, there was a person with a story. Do you ever think about life outside these walls? He asked. All the time, she said. But not about what I lost. About what I hope still exists. Like kindness. Forgiveness. Maybe even understanding. Daniel nodded, feeling a strange ache in his chest. Over the next few days, their conversations grew deeper. She told him about her childhood, how she used to pain. The air inside the prison that morning felt different. Thicker somehow. There was a stillness that hung in the corridors, as if everyone knew what the day meant but didn't want to talk about it. The sound of footsteps, usually sharp and echoing, seemed muted. Daniel arrived earlier than usual, his uniform pressed but his eyes tired. He had barely slept. When he reached her cell, she was sitting by the small window, watching a sliver of sunlight crawl across the floor. She turned her head slowly and gave a soft smile. You came early, she said. I couldn't stay home, Daniel admitted. Didn't feel right, she nodded gently. I didn't sleep much either. It's strange knowing exactly when the world will stop for you. He wanted to say something comforting, but every word felt small compared to the weight of the moment. Instead, he asked, Did you have breakfast? She smiled faintly. They brought me pancakes. I asked for them just because I haven't had any in years. Were they good? She gave a light laugh. Not really. But it's not about the taste. It's about remembering something simple. My mom used to make them every Sunday. She'd burn the edges, but I loved them anyway. Her voice softened when she said it, and Daniel could almost picture the scene. A small kitchen, the smell of batter. A younger version of her laughing. He leaned closer to the bars. You can still hold on to that. No one can take your memories from you. She looked up at him, her expression warm but distant. That's true. But I think today is about letting go, not holding on. He didn't know what to say, so he just stood there for a while, silent. The sound of keys jangling down the hallway broke the quiet. Another guard walked by, nodding curtly to Daniel before disappearing around the corner. She noticed the shift in his posture and asked, How long do I have? Until this evening, he said quietly. They'll move you to the preparation room after lunch. She nodded, calm as ever. Then I suppose that means I still have time to finish this. She gestured to a small notebook on her table. Daniel frowned. What are you writing? A letter, she said. For someone I used to know. Someone who probably still hates me. He hesitated. Do you want me to deliver it? She looked up at him and smiled softly. I was hoping you'd say that. Daniel's heart tightened a little. Of course I will. For the next hour he stayed near her cell while she wrote. The scratch of her pencil was the only sound between them. Sometimes she'd pause, close her eyes and take a slow breath before writing again. When she finally folded the paper, her hands trembled slightly. Here, she said, passing it to him through the bars. Don't open it. Just make sure it reaches the right person. He nodded, slipping it into his jacket pocket. Thank you, she said quietly. You've been kind to me even when you didn't have to be. Daniel swallowed hard. It's not kindness. It's just doing what's right, she gave a faint smile. Doing what's right isn't always easy. Most people stop trying after a while. Her words cut deep because he knew she was right. Somewhere along the way, his job had become routine, a set of rules to follow, boxes to tick. But with her, something had changed. He remembered why he'd chosen to wear the uniform in the first place. A little before noon, she asked if she could go outside for a few minutes. Technically, it wasn't allowed. But Daniel looked around, then quietly unlocked her cell. 5 minutes, he whispered. They walked to the small courtyard behind the cell block. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of grass from beyond the fence. She closed her eyes and lifted her face toward the sky. "It's brighter than I remember," she said softly. "I forgot how sunlight feels on the skin." Daniel watched her carefully, making sure no one saw them. "You really haven't been outside in a while, have you?" "Not in years," she replied. "It's funny, isn't it? We live on a planet full of air, sky, and wind, but when you're in here, it's like you forget the world still moves without you." For a moment, Daniel forgot where they were. He just saw a woman standing quietly in the light, her eyes closed, a calm smile on her lips. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes and said, "Thank you. I just wanted to say goodbye to the sun." They went back inside. As the afternoon went on, the atmosphere in the building grew heavier. Paperwork moved from one desk to another, and guards avoided eye contact. It was routine for them, but Daniel couldn't bring himself to treat it that way. Around 3 o'clock, she asked if she could talk to him alone. "Of course," he said, stepping closer. "I need to tell you something," she began. "You asked me before why I never talked about my case. I think you deserve to know now." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "You don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted gently. "It's time." She took a deep breath. "My husband wasn't the man people thought he was. On the outside, he was kind, successful, respected. But behind closed doors, he was cruel. He hurt me more times than I can count. I tried to leave, but he always found a way to make me stay." Daniel listened silently, his jaw clenched. The next morning, the prison felt quieter than usual. Even the usual chatter of guards and the clanking of doors were softer, as if the building itself understood what had happened. Daniel walked through the hallways with his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed. He still felt the echo of her final words in his mind. "Thank you for seeing me." It didn't feel real. The cell where she used to sit was now empty, stripped bare. The small notebook she always kept on the table had been taken to storage, her few belongings sealed in a box. Daniel stood there for a long moment, looking at the empty space, remembering how she used to hum softly while writing. He exhaled slowly. The job had always been about order and rules, but now it felt hollow. Something inside him had shifted, and he couldn't go back to being the same person. After work, he sat in his car for a long time before starting the engine. The letter she had asked him to deliver was still in his jacket pocket, along with the small note she left for him. He kept pulling it out, reading those 5 words again and again. "Thank you for seeing me." It was such a simple message, yet it carried so much weight. That night, he decided to fulfill his promise. He looked at the address written on the envelope, an old street on the outskirts of the city. The handwriting was neat but slightly shaky, probably written during her final hours. He drove out of town, past the noise and lights, until the roads grew narrower and the houses older. When he reached the small white house at the end of the block, he parked and sat there for a while, wondering what to say. Finally, he got out and walked to the front door. A middle-aged woman opened it. Her hair was streaked with gray, her eyes tired but kind. "Can I help you?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then said softly, "I'm here to deliver this. It's from someone who recently passed." The woman's expression changed. She knew instantly who it was. Her hand trembled as she took the letter. "You were with her, weren't you?" Daniel nodded quietly. "Yes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The woman looked down at the envelope as if afraid to open it. Finally, she said, "Would you like to come in?" He followed her inside. The house was simple, filled with old photos and quiet warmth. She led him to the living room and sat down, holding the letter in her lap. "I'm her sister," she said softly. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from her again." Daniel sat across from her, his hands clasped. "She asked me to make sure this reached you. She spoke of you often." The woman's eyes glistened. "She did?" He nodded. "She said she missed you, that she hoped one day you'd understand." The woman took a deep breath and slowly opened the letter. Daniel looked away, giving her privacy as she read. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock. After a few minutes, he heard her quietly sniffle. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest. "She didn't deserve what happened to her," she whispered. "She was a good person. I tried to help, but she didn't want me involved." Daniel leaned forward. "She told me about her husband. About that night. She said she didn't do it." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "She told you that?" "Yes," Daniel said. "And I believe her." Tears filled her eyes. She wasn't lying. I knew it all along. He was cruel to her, even when everyone else saw him as perfect. She tried to hide it, but I saw the bruises, the fear. When he died, I think she was just too tired to fight anymore." Daniel listened quietly. "No one ever re-examined the case?" She shook her head. "Once the court made its decision, that was it. Her lawyer barely fought for her. He just wanted the case closed." Daniel sat back, his mind racing. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. He realized he couldn't just let it end like this. When he left the house, the night air felt cold against his face. He stood beside his car, looking up at the sky. The stars were faint but steady. He thought about her last words again, about how she asked him to really live. Maybe this was what she meant, not to just move on, but to do something that mattered. The next morning, he went to the records department. He told them he needed access to the old case files. It wasn't part of his duty, but he found a reason, said it was for a review request. The clerk gave him a skeptical look, but eventually handed over the files. He spent hours flipping through the pages, police reports, autopsy documents, witness statements. Everything looked tidy and official. But the more he read, the more inconsistencies he found. There was no solid proof the poison had come from her. The reports only mentioned a substance found in the tea, but no trace was discovered elsewhere in the house. The neighbor's testimony had changed twice, and the husband's family had influence, enough to sway an investigation if they wanted to. Daniel felt a slow anger building inside him. This wasn't justice, this was negligence covered by paperwork. He made copies of the most questionable pages and brought them home. For days, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time he tried to rest, her voice came back, and calm, forgiving, but filled with truth. He decided to reach out to someone he knew, an old friend who worked as a private investigator after leaving the force. He explained the situation carefully, leaving out certain details but making it clear that a mistake had been made. The investigator agreed to look into it. "Send me what you have," he said. "If there's something off, I'll find it." Days passed slowly. Daniel continued working his shifts, but he wasn't really present. He found himself standing longer by her empty cell, almost expecting to hear her humming again. One afternoon, the investigator called. "You were right," he said. "The case stinks. The autopsy report doesn't match the timeline in the police statement. And get this, the few weeks passed after the article's release, but the ripples it created didn't fade. The story spread far beyond the city. News stations began covering it, human rights groups started asking questions, and people who had once doubted her innocence began to speak out. Daniel kept his distance from the attention. He wasn't looking for recognition. All he wanted was to see her name cleared, to give back the dignity that had been stolen from her. But deep inside, he couldn't help but feel the quiet relief of knowing he had finally done something meaningful. One morning, as he walked into the station, he noticed a different kind of silence. The usual chatter among officers had turned into whispers. Some looked at him, some quickly looked away. He could tell word had spread about his involvement in the story. His supervisor called him into the office later that day. The older man leaned back in his chair, looking at Daniel carefully. "You've stirred quite a storm," he said. Daniel stayed calm. "Sir, I only told the truth." "I know," the man replied, "but some people in high places don't like that kind of truth." "I didn't do it for them." The supervisor studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You did the right thing, but be careful. The system doesn't change easily." Daniel thanked him and left the office, feeling both uneasy and proud. Outside the station, a group of people stood by the steps holding small signs that read, "Justice for her." Among them was her sister. When she saw Daniel, she smiled faintly. "They reopened the case," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Daniel's heart lifted. "They did?" "Yes." The Attorney General announced it this morning. "They're reviewing the evidence and the handling of the investigation." He smiled softly. "She finally gets her day." That evening, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, the city lights glowing through the window. He thought about everything that had happened, how one small promise to deliver a letter had changed the course of so many lives. He remembered her face, her calmness even in the darkest moments. He whispered quietly, "You were right. The truth always finds its way." A few days later, the journalist who had helped with the story called him again. "You should come to the courthouse next week," she said. "The review hearing is open to the public. I think you'll want to be there." When the day came, the courtroom was filled. Reporters, activists, and regular citizens all gathered, curious to see how the case that once ended in silence was being brought back to light. Daniel sat near the back, not wanting to draw attention. Her sister sat a few rows ahead, clutching the letter she had received, now worn at the edges from being read too many times. As the officials presented the new findings, Daniel felt his chest tighten. The evidence they uncovered confirmed everything he and the investigator had suspected. The original autopsy report had been altered. The toxicology report had been signed off by someone who later admitted to falsifying details under pressure. When the truth finally came out, the room went completely silent. The lead investigator at the time had made a statement before his death years ago, admitting he was told to wrap up the case quickly because it was making the department look bad. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. It was hard to listen, but he knew this was necessary. After hours of discussion, the panel finally gave its conclusion. The conviction was declared wrongful. Officially, she was innocent. Her sister broke down in tears. People in the room stood up and clapped, not loudly, but with a quiet respect that filled the air. Daniel stayed seated, looking down, his eyes wet. He wasn't sure if he was crying from sadness or relief. Maybe both. Later, as people began leaving the courtroom, her sister turned around and found him still there. She walked over, her face streaked with tears, and hugged him tightly. "She's free now," she whispered. "Even if it's too late. She's finally free." Daniel hugged her back, unable to speak. Outside, the sun was setting. The sky was a blend of orange and purple, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel heavy. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to return to normal. But Daniel wasn't the same man anymore. He didn't see his work as just a job. He saw people, real, fragile, complicated people, behind every uniform, every cell door, every file on his desk. He started volunteering at a small organization that helped families who had loved ones wrongfully convicted. He didn't talk about what he had done. He simply listened, helped with paperwork, and connected them with legal aid. It wasn't about fixing the world. It was about doing small things that mattered, things that made people feel seen. One afternoon, as he was leaving the office, he saw a young officer struggling to calm a distressed mother in the lobby. The woman was crying, saying her son had been arrested unfairly. The officer looked overwhelmed. Daniel stepped in gently. "Let me talk to her," he said. He sat with the woman, listening to her story. She reminded him of her. The same tired eyes, the same desperate hope. He promised to look into it, not as a favor, but as a duty. That night on his way home, he stopped at a quiet cafe. It was one she had once mentioned in their talks, a place she used to go before her life turned upside down. He ordered a cup of tea, the same kind she used to ask for before her final night. He sat there looking out the window at people passing by and smiled softly. There was a time when he thought the world was only black and white, good and bad, guilty and innocent. But now he knew better. Life wasn't that simple. Sometimes people made mistakes. Sometimes systems failed. And sometimes even broken people could leave behind light. When he got home, he placed the photograph of her and her sister on his desk. It had become a quiet reminder of everything he had learned, of the cost of silence and the power of compassion. A few months later, her story was adapted into a documentary. The journalist called him, asking if he would be willing to speak on camera. He hesitated at first, but finally agreed. When the cameras rolled, he spoke from the heart. He didn't talk about the investigation or the paperwork. He talked about her as a person, how she smiled, how she wrote poetry, how she forgave even when no one believed her. "She taught me something," he said, looking straight into the lens. "That justice isn't just about punishment. It's about understanding, about not looking away when someone needs to be seen." When the documentary aired, it moved millions. Letters poured into the organization Daniel volunteered for, people wanting to help, wanting to make things right in their own small ways. Years later, the department quietly changed some of its policies. There were new review processes, new transparency measures. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Daniel had long since retired by then. He lived in a small house near the coast, surrounded by quiet and peace. He kept her photograph in the living room, next to a candle that he sometimes lit in the evenings. One night, as the waves rolled softly outside, he sat on his porch, holding the old letter she had written to her sister, the one he had once delivered. He had read it many times over the years. It wasn't filled with anger or sorrow. It was filled with love, for her sister, for life, Ev. Kindness even in a cruel world. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You were right." The stars shimmered faintly above, the same way they did on the night she left this world. And for the first time, Daniel felt that maybe she hadn't really left at all. She had simply become part of the quiet light that reminded people, even those like him, that change always begins with a single act of seeing someone for who they truly are. He smiled to himself, feeling that familiar warmth in his chest, and whispered one last time, "Thank you for seeing me too." The wind carried his words away, softly as if answering back. The candle flickered inside the house, the photo frame catching a glint of light, two sisters smiling, free at last. And with that, the story of a woman once forgotten became the reason a man, and an entire system, learned how to remember. Spand had recently changed his life insurance policy, naming his family as sole beneficiaries if he died under unnatural circumstances. That kind of clause doesn't just appear accidentally. Daniel gripped the phone tighter. So he planned it? Looks like it. There's a pattern. Financial issues, arguments, and that clause. I'd bet he poisoned himself to make it look like her doing. Maybe he wanted revenge. Maybe he wanted to ruin her even after death. Daniel sat there speechless. The truth was even worse than he imagined. The investigator sighed. But the bad news is, reopening a case like this isn't easy. Especially now. She's gone. There's no appeal to file. Daniel's voice was low but firm. Then we tell her story anyway. Over the next week, Daniel gathered everything. Reports, letters, and even the note she'd given him. He didn't want her to be remembered as a criminal. She deserved more. He reached out to her sister again and told her what they'd found. She cried when she heard it. "She tried to tell them," she said through tears. No one listened. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll make sure they do now." Together, they contacted a local journalist known for revisiting closed cases. The journalist agreed to meet them. Daniel handed over the documents explaining everything, from the inconsistencies in the file to her final words. The journalist listened carefully, then said, "If what you're saying checks out, this could expose serious corruption." "It's not about that," Daniel said softly. "It's about her, about giving her the truth she never got." Over the following weeks, the journalist began piecing the story together. She interviewed the sister, reviewed old statements, and even tracked down one of the original officers who admitted off record that things moved too fast back then. When the article was finally published, it hit the city like a storm. The headline read, "Woman executed for husband's death. New evidence suggests she was innocent." The story spread quickly. People who had once judged her began questioning what really happened. The Justice Department announced they would reopen the investigation. For Daniel, it was bittersweet. Nothing could bring her back, but at least the truth was finally surfacing. A few weeks later, he received a small package in the mail. There was no return address, only his name written neatly on the front. Inside was a small photograph, an old picture of her standing beside her sister, smiling. On the back, a note read, "She'd be proud of what you did. Thank you for believing in her." Daniel held the photo for a long time. He felt both sadness and peace. That night, he drove to a quiet hill outside the city, the kind of place where the stars could still be seen clearly. He sat on the hood of his car, staring at the sky. For the first time in years, he didn't feel burdened by the uniform he wore. He felt human again. He took out the small note she had given him and read it one last time. "Thank you for seeing me," he whispered to the wind. "No, thank you for reminding me how to see." As the night grew colder, he stayed there, watching the stars until the horizon began to glow with the first light of dawn. It felt like a new beginning, not just for him, but for the truth she left behind. One night, she continued, he got drunk. We argued again. I told him I was going to leave for good this time. He laughed and said I never would. Then he grabbed the tea I had made and took a sip. A few minutes later, he collapsed. I called for help, but it was too late. The police came and decided right away that I'd done it. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. They said the tea had poison in it, but I swear I didn't put anything there. I think he did it himself, maybe to punish me, maybe to make sure I paid the price even after he was gone. Daniel's voice was low. Did you ever tell anyone that? I tried, she said, but no one believed me. Not the lawyer, not the judge. They all thought I was lying to save myself. He felt a deep ache in his chest. You've lived all these years with that truth inside you? She nodded slowly. At first I was angry. Then I realized it didn't matter anymore. Sometimes people aren't meant to be believed, they're just meant to endure. Daniel leaned his head against the bars, his thoughts swirling. Everything he had assumed about her, about justice, suddenly felt uncertain. She reached through the bars and touched his hand lightly. Don't look so sad. I made peace with it a long time ago. But I want you to promise me something. Anything, he said without hesitation. When it's time, I want you to be the one to walk me to the room, she said softly. I trust you, he swallowed hard. You don't have to go through this alone. Her eyes softened. That's exactly why I want you there. Because somehow you made me feel like I wasn't alone. The hours crawled by after that. Every sound in the building seemed sharper. The distant clang of a door, the soft murmur of voices in the hall. When evening came, Daniel's chest felt tight with dread. When they came to take her, she was calm. She had changed into simple clothes, her hair tied neatly. She handed Daniel a small folded paper. Don't open this until later, she said. He nodded, tucking it into his pocket beside the letter she had given him earlier. As they walked, she glanced around at the hallways she had walked through so many times. It's strange, she said quietly. This place looks smaller today. Daniel didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. When they reached the final corridor, she paused and looked at him. Remember when I said I had one last wish? Yes, he said, his throat tight. I want to sing, just once, before it all ends. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Go ahead. Her voice began softly, the same haunting tune she had hummed before. The notes floated through the hallway, quiet but powerful. Even the guards behind them stopped for a moment, listening. There was something pure in it, something that cut through all the walls and rules around them. When the song ended, she smiled faintly. Thank you for letting me do that. Daniel could barely speak. It was beautiful. She gave him one last look, her eyes filled with calm acceptance. Promise me something, she said. After this is over, live differently. Don't just exist. Really live. He nodded slowly, unable to form words. Then she was led away, her footsteps fading down the corridor until there was only silence. Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space she had left behind. He didn't move. He didn't even breathe for a moment. The weight of everything pressed down on him, her story, her grace, her quiet strength. When he finally walked outside, the sky was turning dark. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the small paper she had given him. Inside were just 5 words written in her neat, gentle handwriting. Thank you for seeing me. He stared at the words for a long time, feeling something shift deep inside him, something he couldn't name but would never forget. To by the lake near her home, how she dreamed of opening an art studio one day. Daniel found himself listening more closely than he ever had to anyone before. Sometimes she'd ask him questions too. "Do you have a family?" He shook his head. "No, used to, but life had other plans." "Do you ever regret becoming an officer?" she asked one evening. He thought about it. "Sometimes. But then I remember why I did. To help people, to protect them. I just didn't realize how gray that line could become." She nodded knowingly. "The line between right and wrong? Between justice and punishment," he said quietly. For a long time neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was real, almost fragile. Later that week, the warden informed Daniel that her execution date had been moved up. "Tomorrow evening," he said curtly. "Everything needs to be ready." Daniel froze. "Tomorrow? I thought it was next week." "Orders from above," the warden replied. "Some kind of administrative decision. Just do your part." When Daniel went back to her cell, she could see the change in his face. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "They've moved it up tomorrow." She took a deep breath, her eyes lowering. "I see. I'm sorry," he said quietly. She gave a small, sad smile. "Don't be. You didn't decide this." He wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. As the hours passed, Daniel felt restless. He walked the halls aimlessly, unable to focus. When he finally returned to her cell late that night, she was sitting on her bed, sketching again. "What are you drawing?" he asked softly. She turned the paper toward him. It was a portrait, and of him. Not perfect, but unmistakable. His tired eyes, his calm face, he was stunned. "You drew me?" She smiled faintly. "You've been my only real human connection for a long time. I wanted to remember that." Daniel's throat tightened. "You shouldn't have to thank me for that." She shook her head gently. "It's not about thanks. It's about acknowledging kindness when it shows up, even in unlikely places." He stood there, unabashed, and for those who had wronged her. She wrote about hope, about forgiveness, about believing that people could still choose Lou to move. The moment felt heavy, sacred even. Finally, she spoke again. "Tomorrow, I'll get one last wish, right?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." "Then I want you to be there," she said softly. "And I want to ask you for something." He frowned slightly. "What is it?" "You'll know when it's time." Her words lingered in the air like a quiet promise. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The thought of her calm voice, her steady eyes, her quiet acceptance, it all haunted him. He didn't know why he cared so much, but he did. He felt helpless, angry, and lost all at once. When morning came, he arrived at the facility earlier than usual. He watched the sunrise from the outer yard, the sky slowly turning gold and pink. He thought about how unfair it all was, how someone could lose everything, even when they might be innocent. And somewhere deep down, he made a silent vow. Whatever. Her last wish was he would fulfill it, no matter what it took. Because in a world that had taken so much from her, maybe that one act of compassion could mean everything. She looked up at him. "I stopped fighting a long time ago. Sometimes peace isn't about winning. It's about accepting." Her words caught him off guard. Later in the guard room, one of the officers joked about her case. "That one's the pretty killer," he said. "Heard she cried her way through the trial." Daniel stayed silent. He didn't like how they talked about her. To them, she was just another inmate. To him, she was something more complicated, someone who made him question what he thought he knew about guilt and justice. A few days later, the warden informed him that her final arrangements were being prepared. 3 days left, he said flatly. "Make sure everything runs smoothly." Daniel nodded, but his stomach tightened. When he told her, she simply said, "I know." She didn't cry or ask for anything. She just kept drawing. That evening, Daniel stayed behind after his shift. He stood by her cell, unsure why. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "All the time, but not in fear." I think about the places I've never been, the colors I'll never see again. That's enough for me. Her calmness shook him more than anger ever could. As he turned to leave, she said quietly, "Officer, can I ask for something?" He stopped. "What is it?" "Just one thing," she said. "When it's time for me to make my final request, will you be there?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll be there." She smiled again, that same soft, grateful smile. "Thank you." That night, as he drove home through the empty streets, he couldn't stop thinking about her voice. It wasn't the voice of a guilty person. It was the voice of someone carrying a burden too heavy for words. He thought about all the people he'd guarded over the years, the ones who shouted, cried, or begged. But none of them had ever made him feel like this, torn between his duty and his heart. By the time he parked his car, he realized something had changed. This wasn't just another assignment. It was personal now, though he couldn't explain why. The next morning, when he arrived at the facility, the warden stopped him. "You've been spending a lot of time in cell 481, he said. Daniel met his eyes. "Just doing my job." The warden studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good. Keep it that way." But as Daniel walked back down the long corridor, he knew things would never be the same. The line between duty and compassion had started to blur, and in the quiet corner of his heart, he wasn't sure which side he wanted to stand on anymore.